Good morning.
In unison, good morning, Your Honor. Good morning, Your Honor.
In unison, good morning.
Sorry we kept you waiting a short time this morning. This is going to occur. Is the mic? Can you hear me? Is that better?
Can't hear you.
Should be on now. They can't hear. What I'm going to do. Would the witness step down for a moment, please? Can you hear me now?
In unison, yes.
I sound like one of those commercials for the cell phone. Can you hear me now? I want to talk to you a little bit about the reason we were late this morning. We really weren't late. The attorneys and I were working on a legal problem that arose at the end of the day yesterday. And that's the nature of a lawsuit. It's a work in progress. And it's not all determined before you get here, and then it just happens. It happens in front of you. And so there's a couple of things that I want to tell you. And I think perhaps the best thing to do is to talk to you about the co-conspirator statements. And the best way to talk to you about that is to read the law to you, as you will hear again at the end of the case. Evidence of a statement made by one alleged conspirator other than at this trial shall not be considered by you as against another alleged conspirator unless you determine, by a preponderance of the evidence, 1. That from other independent evidence that at the time the statement was made, a conspiracy to commit a crime existed. 2. That the statement was made while the person making the statement was participating in the conspiracy, and that the person against whom it was offered was participating in the conspiracy before and during that time. And 3. That the statement was made in furtherance of the objective of the conspiracy. The word statement, as used in this instruction, includes any oral or written, verbal expression or nonverbal conduct that a person, intended by that person as a substitute for an oral, written, verbal expression. So what is going to happen in this trial is that certain statements are going to come in. And you will later not be able to consider those statements unless you determine, in accordance with this instruction, that there was a conspiracy and that those statements were in the furtherance of an objective of the conspiracy. But the law allows the parties to present statements before and after they think the conspiracy is proved or disproved. So it would be very difficult to handle the case in another way. So you're going to hear statements and later determine your use, as a jury, of those statements in accordance with the law. So I'm going to conditionally admit some statements this morning, and the condition is that you will later determine how you're going to use those statements. Along those same lines, during the course of the trial, the attorneys make objections. I rule on those objections, and I'm following rules of evidence. Quite often it's not necessary that you know why I make a ruling. If I sustain an objection, you reject the question. You don't consider the answer, if part of it came in or all of it. If I overrule an objection, that doesn't mean that I'm favoring that evidence. All I'm saying is that side has the right to give you that evidence for you to consider, and it has nothing to do with my feelings about it. Okay, in that regard, yesterday, the witness, who just stepped down, her name.
Miss Gabriel. Gabriel Kite.
Ms. Kite, Miss Gabriel, said, the question was asked, and did you go to work for Michael Jackson? And the answer was, yes, I did. Earlier, the question had been asked, at some time did Mr. LeGrand ask to employ you and come to work for Michael Jackson? And there was an objection as hearsay. Well, I overruled that objection. And the reason I did is that at that point in the proceeding, it is my opinion that wasn't offered for the truth of the matter, i.e., that she worked for Michael Jackson. It was offered only to show you why she came to work and what she thought she was doing. So it wasn't the truth of the matter, that she worked for Mr. Jackson. That, in fact, you will have to determine whether or not she did. I don't know the answer to that. That will be your decision. But each side will present evidence on that. So as to yesterday, the question, at some time did Mr. LeGrand ask to employ you to come to work for Michael Jackson? She said, yes, he did. The instruction I'm giving you is that's to be considered only, at this point only to show what she thought she was doing. Not for the truth of the matter that she was working for Michael Jackson. Okay, very complicated. But I'll continue to instruct you, as needed, to help you with this. Very difficult area of dealing with statements and conspiracies. Okay, you may resume the witness stand.
Thank you, Your Honor.
When you take the witness stand, I'll remind you that you are still under oath.
Good morning, Ms. Kite.
Good morning.
Yesterday, when we left off, we were talking a little bit about your history, the chronology of events in your employment. And let me revisit the question of who you believed you were working for. First of all, who was it that actually hired you for this work that you did for Michael Jackson?
Who asked me to come to work for Michael Jackson?
Yes.
David LeGrand.
Okay. And when did you, was there a period of time in which you discussed with Mr. LeGrand working for Michael Jackson?
Yes.
Prior to your employment, actual employment?
Yes, there was.
And when was that? When did that discussion begin?
About the 27th of January.
Okay. Were there further discussions? When were you actually hired?
On the 9th of February, Mr. LeGrand sent me an email along with other people that were working on the MJJ working group that said, "Welcome to the team."
Okay. And between that period of time when you began discussions with Mr. LeGrand and the time that you actually became a member of the team, did you continue to have discussions with Mr. LeGrand about the issues involved in being a PR person for Michael Jackson?
Yes, I did.
Were you paid for your employment?
Yes, I was.
How much?
$10,000.
Was that payment in advance or arrears of your employment?
Well, it was supposed to be $20,000 for the month. When I signed the contract on the 14th of February, David gave me a $10,000 check, so that was an advance.
So you began your work on the 9th?
Yes.
You signed your contract on the 14th?
Yes.
What time did you sign that contract?
Late in the afternoon. It was between 3 and 4 o'clock.
And where did that take place, the signing?
At Mr. LeGrand's law office.
And where is that?
In Las Vegas.
Okay. As far as your background as a public relations person, what do you consider to be your greatest assets in that field?
I believe it's crisis management. Being able to see a problem, and determine what steps can be taken to correct it.
Are there any contacts or other qualities that you possess that enable you to conduct that type of work?
Objection. Vague.
Well, I can be a little more specific. What is it that enables you to conduct crisis management in terms of any abilities? Well, let me just leave it open. Let me leave it open-ended. What do you do? How do you go about conducting crisis management work?
Well, other than being neurotic, which comes in very handy, I think I have a very good grasp of the media as a whole. Internet, television, radio, newspaper. And an innate ability to be able to size up the client or the product that I'm representing, find out where their assets are, the best aspects that they have to represent themselves to the public, or the product, and to be able to move them forward from there. But regardless of if it's a crisis management client or if it's just a client that you're trying to do public relations for, I think probably my greatest asset is being able to see the total product or the total person, and to explore other avenues of being able to bring them to fruition.
Do you have a philosophy about how to approach crisis management?
Absolutely.
What is that?
Very proactive.
And what do you mean by proactive?
Being out in front of the media, having a crisis plan just in case something happens. A lot of times when people begin to promote themselves or to promote a product, they like to think of the good, the upside, the good things that can come out of promoting themselves or their product, and they don't like to analyze the bad things that might happen. I have an ability to be able to do both before I start with the client, so that they can be comfortable and not panic if something happens. I want them to know that I've been able to thoroughly research both the ups and downs of everything they do and that, I can cover them on either side.
Is it important to confront the bad things?
Absolutely.
Why do you believe that?
Because if you don't confront it, somebody else is going to confront it for you, and then you're going to be caught in a downward spiral.
All right. When you were first in discussions with Mr. LeGrand in late January, what did you perceive to be Michael Jackson's status issues? What have you, regarding public relations?
Objection. Foundation.
Sustained.
When you began discussions with Mr. LeGrand concerning working with Michael Jackson or working on his behalf, did you do some research into news media, Mr. Jackson's background, anything of that nature, to better understand the public relations issues involving Mr. Jackson?
Yes.
And based on that research, were you able to form an opinion as to what PR issues needed to be addressed or should be addressed if you were called to become an employee?
Yes, I was.
Objection. Foundation.
Your Honor, she is testifying in some capacity as an expert witness in this area.
The objection is overruled.
All right.
Yes, I was.
All right. How did you evaluate Mr. Jackson from a PR point of view at that point, late in January?
What was my evaluation and recommendation, is that the question?
Yes.
I believed that there was too much negative exposure on Mr. Jackson's actions, and not enough exposure on his strength as a musician. And so I told Mr. LeGrand that I felt immediately the focus needed to be taken off of him as a person, as a man, and the things that the public may or may not like about him, and put back on all of the years of wonderful music that he had given to the public.
Okay. And sometime between the time when you were recruited and the time that you actually became an employee, did something occur that changed your perspective as to what the necessary issues were dealing with PR?
Yes.
Objection. Your Honor. May I 402 the witness on her credentials, the basis for her opinion?
No. Go ahead.
Can you repeat the question?
The question was, between late January and the time that you were actually hired. I believe you said it was the 9th of February. Did something happen that changed your perception of Mr. Jackson from a public relations standpoint?
Yes.
What was that?
The Martin Bashir documentary.
All right. How did the Martin Bashir documentary present itself as an issue for you, from a public relations standpoint?
As an absolute disaster.
Why do you say that?
I felt that the documentary was put together in a way that portrayed Mr. Jackson in an extremely negative light.
Were there particular issues with that documentary that you believed presented problems for Mr. Jackson from a PR point of view?
Yes, there were.
Objection. Foundation. Relevance. 352.
Overruled. You may answer.
What were those issues?
I believed that Mr. Jackson was portrayed in a very negative light in his actions as far as the shopping spree, as far as climbing the tree, as far as statements made portraying himself as Peter Pan, and the interaction that he had with the person that was on the video.
The young boy?
Yes.
And how did you monitor the international media during this period of time?
Yes, I did.
Is that part of your job?
Yes, it is.
And what was the reaction of the international media at this point?
Well, there was an immediate reaction, and they jumped on exactly what I believed that they would, which was to.
Objection. Non-responsive.
The question was, what was the reaction? And all sustained the objection.
All right, I'll risk the question. In terms of the reaction of the international media, how did you evaluate in your role as a public relations person?
That it was extremely negative.
All right, was there any positive media?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, have you ever been asked to characterize or measure this crisis on a scale of 1 to 10?
Yes, I have.
And how did you characterize it?
A 25.
Objection. Foundation.
Overruled.
A 25.
So you perceived this to be a big problem?
Absolutely.
Did you formulate a plan to deal with this problem?
Yes, I did.
Did you work with other people in formulating this plan?
Somewhat, yes.
Okay. Were they other members of the team?
Yes.
Okay. Specifically, who?
Specifically Melanie Riley from Bell Yard.
And tell me a little bit more about Bell Yard, if you would.
Bell Yard is a crisis management public relations firm in the United Kingdom.
Are they a small firm, large firm, medium?
I don't know.
And was there just Melanie that you dealt with from Bell Yard, or other people as well?
I believe Richard was the other gentleman that I dealt with from Bell Yard.
Do you know their last names?
Melanie is Riley. And I don't remember Richard's last name.
Okay. So in the beginning, when you were formulating this plan, what was your idea? What was your goal?
Well, my goal was to immediately speak with someone and assess all of the negative impacts from the Bashir documentary, addressing each one. Because my fear was that while one media source might pick up on one thing, another media source would pick up on another thing, so there would be multiple angles coming at us. And I felt and believed that unless we had a clear plan of attack to be able to address each one of these issues, we were not going to be as proactive on Mr. Jackson's behalf as we needed to be.
Were there any other goals other than attacking the current media problem?
Yes. My goal was to begin an immediate rehabilitation on his image.
So how did you plan to go about these goals?
Well, I needed to address, first of all, the negative items that were coming out in the press. And then once that was taken care of, I wanted to begin to do the rehabilitation on his image.
So in terms of the nuts and bolts of public relations, how do you go about doing that?
How would I personally go about doing that?
Yes.
I would write out a list of questions, decide how people wanted to respond or to react. I would look at what was potentially coming up in the media. Because you have to understand, with the media, they don't call you up politely and say, "We're going to write a story about your client, and we'd love to give you an opportunity to respond and please tell us your side." They send you a very short email or give you a call and say, "Look, this is what we're printing about your client, and I'm on a deadline, so if you don't get back to me, too bad." I mean, that's pretty much what it was. And so I believed that we needed to immediately sit down and assess all of the negative things that could have come out of this documentary for Mr. Jackson, and decide how we wanted to respond so that we didn't get stuck in a downward spiral of people printing things because they didn't get a response quickly enough.
Did Martin Bashir figure in any way to your plan of attack?
Yes.
In what way?
I wanted to look at the credibility of the other documentaries that he had done.
Was Belliard in agreement with that?
Yes, they were.
Generally speaking, was Belliard's approach to the problem of Mr. Jackson's PR consistent with your own?
Yes, it was.
Did you participate in conference calls with Belliard with any of the members of the team?
Yes, I did.
Which members?
I believe 1 or 2 times Mr. Garrigus and Mr. Conitzer were on the calls. The other times it was mostly the team from the UK. Andrew Hockhauser, Hamish Porter, Peter and Janie Castle.
Okay.
John Genga, too, also was on those phone calls. And then David LeGrand.
What was Mr. Castle's and Genga's duties? Who were they?
They were other attorneys. I don't know specifically what their duties were, other than I believe they were involved in the litigation that Mr. Jackson had undertaken against Granada and ITV.
So I believe yesterday you testified that one of the people you reported to was Mark Schaffel?
Yes, that's correct.
Did you also report to Ronald Conitzer?
Yes, I did.
And what about Mark Garrigus?
Yes, I did.
When did Mark Garrigus become part of the team?
I believe it was around the 7th of February.
Okay. During the time, or the month of February, early February, did the problem of Mr. Jackson's PR become exacerbated in any fashion?
Yes, it did.
Specifically why?
Besides the documentary?
Yes.
There was some information released about Mr. Jackson in the public that I felt also negatively impacted his image.
Okay. What was it?
Objection. 352. Foundation, and hearsay.
This is also offered to explain her conduct as well as the conduct of the team and the level of the crisis.
Your Honor, I would object. She's not qualified as an expert.
She's not offering an opinion at this point.
I'm not considering her testimony as expert testimony. She's a percipient witness as to what happened during this time period, and that's the only way that I'm considering her testimony. That's why I denied your 402 request, because she's just a percipient witness. So, and on your 352 objection, was that over a time? I'm not sure. Which of the many specific areas were you objecting under 352?
Well, Your Honor, she worked for less than 2.
No. Which of the legal subsections of 352 are you relying on?
All of them.
For your objection?
All of them.
All right. Overruled.
Okay. So I'll back up a little bit. You've said that there were additional problems that arose in the media. Did you have to perceive it as your duties to deal with these problems as a PR representative for Mr. Jackson?
Yes, I did.
So these problems became your problems?
Absolutely. I felt it was my position to address anything that affected Mr. Jackson negatively.
So what was coming out in the media at this point?
There were documents that were released on a website, thesmokinggun.com, that, in conjunction with the Bashir documentary, I felt was just absolutely beyond a disaster for Mr. Jackson.
Okay. And what did those documents concern?
Objection. Hearsay. Foundation. 352.
As reported in the media, is the question.
Same objection, Your Honor.
I'll overrule the objection. But advise the jury, again, that this area is not being offered for the truth of the matter asserted. That whatever she's going to testify to that appeared on the smoking gun is being offered strictly to show why she took her next action.
And I'm not asking you specifically what was written in those documents. I'm just asking in general terms, what was that document about?
It addressed another PR issue that Mr. Jackson had in 1993.
What was that PR issue?
Objection.
That's my question.
352. Foundation. Hearsay. No personal knowledge.
I believe she has personal knowledge.
I've already ruled on this. The objection is overruled. Go ahead.
You may answer the question.
They involved Mr. Jackson having inappropriate actions with a young boy.
Okay. The 93 case?
Yes.
Okay. What else was there? What other problems, other than the 93 case, that came up? You said there were several.
Besides the documentary, the things that were contained in the documentary?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Well, the media then began to pick up on any number of things about Mr. Jackson. Pediatricians were weighing in about the way that he fed his baby on the documentary. There was just several, they were attacking him personally from every angle.
Okay. Were there any other purported news programs that were coming?
Yes, there were.
What was that?
NBC was doing a program about Mr. Jackson's purported plastic surgeries.
Just that, or did that include other things?
Also included other things.
Okay. Was that actually aired?
Yes, it was.
Was that positive or negative for Mr. Jackson, in general terms?
In general, I felt it was very negative.
What about members of the team specifically? Were there ever any members of the team that became problems or burdens in terms of the media and Mr. Jackson's image?
Yes, there was.
Who?
Mr. Schaffel.
Mark Schaffel?
Mark Schaffel, yes.
And why was he a problem?
Objection. 352. Foundation. Hearsay.
Vague. Sustained.
What was it specifically that was reported in the media? And I'm just asking you, let me just say generally, why was Mr. Schaffel a problem in the media concerning Mr. Jackson?
Objection. Foundation. Hearsay. Vague. 352.
The objection's overruled.
Mr. Schaffel had a very negative image and I felt very strongly that that image might taint Mr. Jackson.
All right. Who else had a problem?
With Mr. Schaffel?
No. Was there any other member of the team that presented a problem for Mr. Jackson, I should say?
Not of the team per se. But there was someone else that Mr. Jackson's name was associated in the press that I felt would be a problem.
Okay. Who else was that?
Mr. Malnick. Al Malnick.
Okay. You say you were hired by Mr. Jackson. Have you ever met Mr. Jackson?
No, sir, I have not.
And why did you believe that you were working for him?
Because David LeGrand told me that I was. And the contract that I signed said, MJJ Productions, on it.
All right. And did you, in fact, work on Mr. Jackson's behalf?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Okay. Who did you understand was paying your $10,000 retainer?
Mr. Jackson.
What proactive measures, if any, did you want to take to address these issues?
Well, I believed that immediately there should be a very strong on-camera statement from Mr. Jackson himself. I wanted to be able to explore the documentary that Mr. Bashir had created to see if there were any technical inconsistencies. I wanted to be able to use everything at my disposal to try to find a way to address the issues that Mr. Jackson was experiencing and give the other side of the story.
Have you ever heard of the organization called Fire Mountain?
Yes, I have.
What is Fire Mountain?
Fire Mountain is a corporation.
Objection. Foundation.
Sustained.
Was there a film that was being prepared to help address the PR issues?
Yes, there was.
Whose idea was that?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
Specifically.
But it wasn't your idea?
No, sir.
Was there a member of the team that was preparing this film?
Yes.
Who was that?
Mr. Schaffel.
Do you know what the subject matter of this film was?
It was to be a rebuttal to Martin Bashir's documentary.
Did you have any discussions with the team concerning what network or what broadcast medium would be used to show this film?
Yes, I did.
Do you know whether it was ultimately aired?
Yes, it was.
On which network?
Fox.
Do you know why Fox was chosen?
Yes, I do.
Why is that?
Because they would give Mr. Schaffel an element of creative control.
Were there any other networks that were bidding for it?
Yes, there was.
Who?
NBC.
Did you have any input into whether or not certain people would be included on this rebuttal film?
I had a discussion with Mr. Schaffel about the rebuttal film, yes.
Did you provide him your insights as to what should be presented?
He told me some things that he thought, some people that he thought he was going to put on the film, and asked me what I thought. And I told him.
Objection. Hearsay.
This is offered to explain conduct and, actually, I can move on and get more to the point. So I'll withdraw the question and allow the striking of the answer.
I'll strike the answer. But she never got to say anything about what was said.
Very well.
Go ahead.
Did you have a discussion about Mr. Jackson's ex-wives with Mr. Schaffel?
Yes, I did.
Did you have a suggestion for him about whether one or both of these ex-wives should be presented on the rebuttal film?
Yes, I did.
Objection. 352. Foundation.
The question calls for hearsay.
The question. Your Honor, I haven't asked for a statement. I've just asked whether she had a discussion.
All right, I'll overrule the objection.
All right. Did you have a discussion with Mr. Schaffel about that?
Yes, I did.
And did you make a suggestion?
Yes, I did.
What did you suggest?
Objection. 352. Foundation.
Calls for hearsay.
Hearsay.
Sustained.
Did Mr. Schaffel ever make any comments to you concerning his influence over Debbie Rowe?
Objection. Leading. Foundation. Hearsay. 352.
I'll be happy to give you an offer of proof, Your Honor.
The leading is sustained.
Ms. Kite, laughter.
Go ahead.
Try it again?
Yes.
It's back on, Judge.
All right, go ahead.
Did you have a discussion with Mr. Schaffel about any proposed individuals that would appear on the rebuttal film?
Objection. Leading. Foundation. Hearsay. 352.
Hardly leading.
Objection is overruled.
Yes, I did.
Okay. Who did you discuss?
Debbie Rowe.
Okay. And did you have a feeling about whether or not, from a PR standpoint, she would be a good candidate for this rebuttal film?
Objection. Hearsay. Foundation. 352. Leading.
The question is, did she have a feeling?
Relevance. And vague.
Overruled. You may answer.
I'm sorry, you're going to have to ask again after all that.
I'll have the question read back. Record read.
Yes, I did.
What was that?
Objection. 352. Relevance. Foundation. Hearsay.
Overruled.
I'm sorry.
I can have it read back.
Please. Record read. Yes, I did.
And what was that feeling?
I didn't think she was the strongest candidate.
And what was Mr. Schaffel's response?
Objection. Hearsay. 352.
This is offered in furtherance of the conspiracy.
Foundation.
All right. I'm taking this testimony subject to the proving up of the conspiracy. I'll allow the question.
What did Mr. Schaffel tell you?
He said that he could get Debbie Rowe to say whatever he wanted her to say.
Thank you. This notebook is coming apart, Your Honor. If I can have just a moment. During the course of your work with the team, I believe you testified that you used the Internet to communicate through emails?
Yes, that's correct.
I previously provided counsel with copies of all these documents, Your Honor, that I'm going to be showing the witness. And for the record, this is document number, from original exhibits, Schaffel files, and appears to be a document itemized under 403, page 17. It appears to be a 3-page email from Ronald at High Tech America to Mark in L.A. dated February 16, 03.
Is it marked?
May we see that for a second, please? Thank you.
I provided you with copies. Off-the-record discussion held at counsel table. All right.
Now, this is a formally marked exhibit?
It is, Your Honor.
403 is the exhibit number?
It is the exhibit number. And it is beginning on page 17 of exhibit number 403. If you could take a moment and just look at page 4, or exhibit number 403, what I've identified, pages 17, 18, and 19.
Could we just have a moment? Excuse me. We don't have the second page of that exhibit. Maybe we could.
It's in the packet I gave you.
It's in the back?
It's in the packet I gave you yesterday. Do you have that?
It's not in the binder. Is it somewhere else?
Yes.
It appears to say page 1 of 2, but there's no page 2.
Is it in
the individual packet?
Yeah, it's in there. Off-the-record discussion held at counsel table. Have you had a moment to look at that?
Yes.
Can you identify that for me?
Yes.
I'm not blaming anybody. We don't seem to have page 2 of the exhibit.
I'm sorry. I'll take a moment and show counsel. Off-the-record discussion held at counsel table. All right. Have you had a chance to look at that?
Yes, I have.
Can you identify it for me?
Yes, it's an email that I sent to Ronald Konitzer with.
Okay. What was the date of the email that you sent to Ronald Konitzer?
It was the 14th of February.
And what was? I'm not going to ask you to read it to the jury at this time. We're going to lay some additional foundation with this exhibit at a later time. But I'm going to ask you to tell me what was the substance of that email, and what was your purpose in sending it. And let's start with, what was the concern you expressed in that email?
I expressed great concern that there were many things that were preparing to break negatively against Mr. Jackson over the next 72 hours, which would have been between the 14th of February and the 17th. And I just did not understand why there wasn't anyone.
Objection. Narrative and non-responsive.
Sustained as to the last sentence as stricken.
Okay. So I was asking you what your concerns were. What concerns specifically did you express in that email?
That.
Objection. Hearsay.
Your Honor, this is offered to show knowledge on behalf of the co-conspirators, the reasons for the part of the motive of this case, the nature of the crisis, and the action that were taken on behalf of this witness to alert.
Objection. That is a speaking objection, Your Honor.
Goes to the objection.
Are you offering this to explain a response from the recipient of this email?
I am offering it, Your Honor, to explain. It's offered to explain the conduct as well as the information that was conveyed by this witness to the co-conspirators regarding the degree of the crisis that existed at that time. Now, it is not being offered into evidence at this time, but I'm laying foundation for its offering that will provide additional foundation at a later date.
May I object, Your Honor?
Her purposes in sending this email and the fact that she did send it to Mr. Konitzer and provided him with this information is relevant as to Mr. Konitzer's knowledge of the events.
I object on hearsay and foundation. And there's no evidence whatsoever Mr. Jackson's involved in any conspiracy.
That remains to be seen.
Any of the conspiracy evidence is being received subject to the proving up of the conspiracy, as of indicated. The court will allow the question here with the admonition that the information that is being conveyed in the email is not offered for the truth of the matter asserted, but to show that the recipient received this information. Or not that he received it. That it was sent to him.
All right.
Go ahead.
So, back to my question. I'll rephrase it. What was your purpose in sending this email? Why don't I ask it that way?
To advise Mr. Conitzer that over the next 72 hours Mr. Jackson was going to face another barrage of extremely negative publicity, and it needed to be addressed immediately.
All right. Let's take our morning break.
All right.